sound of the line.
Who's signed up, they're all coming in right now. And we want to make sure everyone's in and can hear and see the presentation. So it should just take like another minute or so. More people are still coming in. I'm watching. The software is always so interesting. We can see exactly how many of you are popping in. Okay, my name is Lucy Crocker, and I own a public outreach firm in Sacramento, and we help the city of Sacramento with public outreach on projects such as the Del Rio Trail. And I'm sure I've seen many of you at other meetings, and we're glad that so many of you have signed up and are participating tonight. So the meeting tonight is going to be really focusing on design and construction phase of the Del Rio Trail and giving you an update since when we saw you the last time. And we want to keep this project moving in a forward fashion. So decisions that have already been made or discussions that we've already had about things that have already been resolved, we're going to be focusing more on new things that have come up tonight and not be regressing back to decisions that have already been made. So for questions tonight, you can type in questions at any point, starting right now, actually, during the presentation that we're giving. and you can, we're giving you a little example here visually of what the box looks like at the bottom if you haven't done this before. If you take your cursor and you kind of run it over the bottom of the screen, this box will pop up and you just click on the Q&A button and type in your question. So we'll be having what we're going to be doing tonight is having a presentation followed by a Q&A session. And questions that we don't get to tonight before 7 o'clock, we will be answering offline of the meeting today. And we do want to keep everyone's time, consider everyone's time. So we will be closing the meeting tonight at 7, but also posting FAQs on the website in addition. So I'm going to introduce a couple of folks that you'll be hearing from tonight and then tell you a few others who are behind the scenes to answer questions if needed. So first, Adam Randolph from the City of Sacramento. He's a senior engineer and he's also the project manager. And William Shunk is also here and he's also another senior engineer with the Department of Public Works. We have Pamela Dalsing-Walling from Dokken Engineering here tonight, and she's the project manager. And then Amy Baker from Dokken Engineering, who's an environmental planner. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pamela, and she's going to get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucy. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to start off with a brief project, or actually a corridor history. For those who are new to the project, thought we'd lay a little bit of background. So the corridor itself was a former rail facility used to transport agriculture from the Central Valley to the Sacramento region. It was abandoned back in 1978 by Southern Pacific Railroad, and then later on purchased by Sacramento Regional Transit. They had plans to develop the corridor for a light rail, which ultimately did not occur. And so it left that for the city of Sacramento to buy back in, well, actually this year that transaction was completed. So the city of Sacramento now owns that corridor. Which brings us to this project. So this project's history starts back several years ago, starting in 2015 with a coordinated effort between the city and Southland Park Neighborhood Association. So the neighborhood conducted a survey and we had a public meeting with them, and ultimately the city investigated and applied for a grant for preliminary engineering funds and ultimately was successful in obtaining $2.2 million in funds from SACOG, which they're using for preliminary engineering, environmental clearance, and final design. So with that money in hand, the city of Sacramento procured a contract with Dokken Engineering to perform the engineering and environmental documentation. We began that effort in 2017, and we did perform those environmental studies. We conducted a lot of outreach throughout the years to talk about the project and get feedback. And then in 2019, we concluded the environmental clearance, and we got that approved through the City of Sacramento's council. We did address the CEQA lawsuit, and upon completion of that, we began final design in 2020, which was just last year. So the purpose of the project is to create a direct connection between the neighborhoods in South Sacramento and the downtown area. It will also improve pedestrian and bicycle access throughout the entire project length, and provide an ADA compliant active transportation connection for all of the folks, pedestrians and bicyclists between South Sacramento communities to all of the different land uses in the area, including schools, retail, jobs, and the recreational destinations that are in the Southland Park area. In addition, this project will also, given that this corridor has been abandoned for some time, it will also activate the corridor by putting more people on the trail, and that will serve to reduce crime.
Pamela, it's Lucy. I wanted to ask, someone asked if you could state the full name of the acronyms.
Oh, sure. So ADA, American with Disabilities Act, and I'll try to be more attentive to that as we go through. So a quick project overview, just to give you a visual, we have, it's about a 5-mile corridor, starts at the American River Parkway on the north end, and then travels in a north-south direction where it concludes and conforms to the near the Bill Conlon Sports Complex and also the Freeport Regional Water Facility, better known as the Big Water Tower. So that's just a quick visual on the length of the project. And then we'll just step through from beginning to end, starting on the far north and then going towards the south, just to give you a sense of all of the different characteristics of the project. So again, this is the point where we connect at the far north end of the project. We'll connect to the Sacramento River Parkway, and we will cross the railroad bridge with a cantilever structure on that bridge. And as soon as we get south of the bridge, we will parallel the railroad. The existing railroad is shown in purple, and we'll be paralleling that on the west side of the tracks. The graphic here shows that there's going to be a parking lot on the east side of the trail, and then also because the trail is elevated in this section, there will be an ADA, or American with Disabilities Act, compliant ramp that allows access all the way up to the trail from the corner of Darnell and Riverside. Continuing in a southerly direction, again, we'll be paralleling the tracks to the west. And when we reach Fruit Ridge Road, there'll be a new pedestrian actuated signal that will be installed for safe crossing of Sutterville Road. And then we'll continue southerly and we'll be along the west side of the railroad tracks, crossing Southland Park Drive with a hybrid beacon signal that's going to be placed there. It's a rectangular rapid flashing beacon that again will be pedestrian actuated. Continuing south along the corridor, again, still west of the railroad tracks, we'll approach the intersection of Del Rio Road, Normandy Lane, and 27th Avenue. At that location, we'll be realigning the roadways slightly to make sure that the crossings are perpendicular and that each direction will be stop controlled. And then we'll continue, continuing south in this area, there will be an improvement south of the intersection where we will lower the current grade. There's a current embankment at that location, and lowering that grade will allow for an ADA compliant crossing from east to west, specifically for the school children that are accessing the elementary school east of the railroad tracks. Continuing south, we'll be on the east side of the Del Rio detention basin, and then we will approach Fruit Ridge Road, where another pedestrian actuated traffic signal will be installed for safe crossing of Fruit Ridge Road. And then continuing south again, we'll be just to the east of the Sacramento Department of Utilities, where we approach 35th Avenue. At 35th Avenue, there'll be a crossing of that street as well. We'll be incorporating what we are showing here in the upper right-hand corner, kind of bumping out the sidewalk area and curb and gutter in that area for kind of a traffic calming effect, but also to shorten the distance for pedestrians and bicyclists to travel as they move north and south along the trail. From 35th Avenue, continuing in a southerly direction, the path will be along the back fences of the neighborhood for Park Village Street, and between the other fences of 14th Street as well. And the trail will then bring you to 43rd Avenue, where again, it will be a similar treatment to 35th Avenue with the shortened crossing. And then continuing south again, all the way to the connection with Charlie Jensen Park. From Charlie Jensen, we'll continue south along the existing maintenance road, and where there's currently a bridge across Willow Slough, that bridge will be replaced with a new bridge. And then continuing south, we'll go behind the current Department of Utilities facility along Freeport. Continuing south, paralleling Freeport to the west, And there will be an access point right in this location to the city-owned lot along Palomar Circle. The trail will connect up to the existing signal at Freeport and Florin Road, and then crossing over again in a southerly direction, continuing on, the trail will parallel the east side of the tracks at this location and eventually cross down to connect, to provide a couple of connections with Zeeburg Park. So at this point, we are again west of the tracks and following in a southerly direction until we reach the intersection with Pocket Road and Freeport Boulevard. At that location, again, we'll utilize the existing signal to cross and continue south along Freeport Boulevard just to the west, and crossing underneath the bridge structures that were recently widened for the I-5 widening project. And then we'll connect up to the existing bike path there at the Freeport Regional Water Facility, where you can then either cross the street and access the Bill Conlon Sports Complex or continue in a southerly direction, connecting to the existing bike path. So that's just a really quick summary of the various features of the project. And then I'm just going to go through some of the activities that we've been up to since we last got together. During the final design is a time period that allows us to dive into the details. And so one of those details is making sure that we're having a minimal impact to the trees. There are a lot of trees along the corridor, and so we've been working to make slight adjustments to avoid as many trees as possible. And then also, if where possible and where appropriate, incorporate small retaining structures so that we can avoid those trees. Another item that we've been focusing on a lot is, so this is a 5-mile corridor. There are a lot of utilities that we're crossing, including water, sewer, electric, cable, telephone. And so where we are actually impacting those utilities, we are working with those utility companies to do minor relocations or adjusting their valves to grade. In addition, we're also attaining our permits and approvals. So some of our permits are environmental related, and so we're working with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to obtain the streambed alteration agreement with that agency, and then also working with the Regional Water Quality Control Board to get their 401 water quality certification for the project. In addition to those permits, we're also getting approvals from the folks that we're going to be crossing their jurisdiction, including the United States Army Corps of Engineers on the north side of the project where we touch down on the Sacramento River Parkway. That's actually a levee that has both jurisdiction with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. So for both of those agencies, we're working with them to get the encroachment permissions in order to connect into the Sacramento River Parkway. And then finally, we do cross Caltrans's right-of-way with our crossing of the railroad bridge, and we're working closely with Caltrans to get the design approved for the modification to that bridge and for crossing their right-of-way. In addition, we're also working on getting the complete right-of-way that we need for the corridor. So the majority of the corridor is owned by the city of Sacramento, but and that was through an agreement with the regional transit. So the city has purchased the corridor, much of the corridor from regional transit. What remains is there's a small area on the north side of the project that goes through State Parks property. And so we're working with State Parks to attain an easement through that area. As I showed on a previous exhibit, the lots on the corner of San Mateo and Riverside, and also Darnell Way and Riverside, the city has purchased those lots in order to provide for the parking lot and for the ramp that goes up to the trail. And then in addition, as some of you may have heard, there's some existing encroachments that are on the trail. And so the city is working one-on-one with those property owners to rectify those encroachments. And then also as part of this trail design, we're also designing a lot of connections, as we talked about in some of the exhibits that I walked through earlier. We're going to be connecting on the south side of the project to the Bill Conlon Sports Complex. There's also a development that's going in just south of the Pocket and Freeport Road intersection. We're going to be providing an access point for them as well. And then again, as we showed before in the exhibits, we're connecting to Charlie Jensen Park, to Zebra Park, and also the city-owned lot on Palomar Circle. And then as we went through in those exhibits, there are 8 crossings, roadway crossings that we're working with. And we talked a little bit about the treatments that each of those crossings will have. At some of those crossings, we're going to be incorporating some decorative elements, including stamped and colored concrete, and then also street name bands. An example is shown here where approaching each of the crossings, of the roadway crossings, those decorative bands will have the street name that you're approaching, walking or biking towards those roads. And then also, as a way to keep track of where you're located along the trail, we'll also be installing some post-mile markers. And then finally, we're also completing our structure designs. As we talked about, we're going to be modifying the I-5 bridge. There's currently a railroad bridge over I-5. And on this bridge off to the south side of the bridge, we're going to be creating a cantilever structure so that the trail can cross utilizing the existing structure. And then finally, down just south of Charlie Jensen Park, we will be replacing the existing Willow Slough Bridge with a new bridge in its place. And now I'm going to turn it over to Adam Randolph so he can talk about schedule and construction.
All right, excuse the awkward flip there, and the name on the screen. Ooh, our people are quick. Hi, everybody. My name is Adam Randolph. I'm the design project manager for the Del Rio Trail. I am a senior engineer with the city, so I will be with this project all the way through the end of construction. As this graphic kind of explains pretty clearly, right now we're finalizing our design, so that should be done by the end of this year, which means we will be ready to construct in spring of 2022. The big question that we ask is, what's the appropriate timing for construction? And when we look at construction, there's a lot of challenges to it that we have to kind of coordinate. As Pamela just explained, we have the structure over I-5, which is going to be a sizable part of our construction project. It's probably going to take upwards of 4 months to construct, and we have to be careful what window we build that in. We also have environmental limitations, just working around endangered species, primarily in this case, nesting raptors, largely Swainson's hawk and other hawks. We have to plan for signal work, since signals are actually one of the items that take the longest time to order the materials for. So those tend to put us out close to half a year. And of course, we have to plan for the 5 miles of trail paving, which isn't an insignificant amount. So while we're planning this, we plan to be in construction in 2022. One thing that we're trying to make sure of is, or one of the big things we're trying to make sure of, is that our bridge construction doesn't affect the recreational line out of Old Sac, or the recreational rail coming out of Old Sacramento, particularly when Polar Express time is going in winter. So we're shooting for summer, or mid to late summer, to get everything done, and we should have everything wrapped up, we're hoping, by September, October of 2022. So in the meantime, we're going to be continuing with all those next steps that Pamela just walked through. Once we have our design plans finalized, once we have all of our permits in hand, we'll be able to advertise the project. And at that point, we will get our contractor on board and really lock down what our construction schedule is going to look like. And once we know what that looks like, we will, of course, be reaching out again and giving everybody an update on what to expect in their neighborhood at more specific times. So with that, I think Lucy is going to jump back on and start answering a few of the questions that we received in advance of the meeting.
Hi, everyone. Lucy, I'm back. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to answer all project-specific questions. So if there's something that's not a project-specific question, we won't be answering that tonight. And we're going to generally be touching on encroachments so that you all have an understanding of the process, but those are best handled on a case-by-case basis with the city. And we know many of you are already talking to the city. So I'm going to go through a couple of the questions that we received prior to the meeting and walk through those with you, and so that you understand, so that you can hear some of the questions that we had. Pamela? Okay, so the one that we've been asked quite a bit is the city planning to install security fencing along the trail? So the trail is going to be built similar to other parkways within the city. Property owners will be able to maintain their property fences along the trail. No additional fences or barriers are planned. Next one, Pamela. Okay, how is the city handling encroachments? The city is engaging one-on-one with property owners who are currently encroaching into public property, and those details are being worked out on a case-by-case basis, as I mentioned. So what are the security plans, and is there a plan to discourage camping? So once the trail is constructed, the corridor will be patrolled by the city's park rangers, and they, together with PD, the police department, will respond to calls and ensure that no loitering after sunset, no camping, and no accumulation of garbage or personal possessions along the trail. Subsequent strategies will evolve as needed to address specific issues. Before I read off the next question, I did want to let someone that had asked a question on the chat box know that if the acronym you're curious about was SACOG, that's the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, and they're the ones that give the funding for projects like this. So is there any type of lighting plan for the trail? Lighting will be provided at locations where the trail crosses a street and on the bridge over I-5. And for the trail itself, the city's policy is not to provide lighting along bicycle and pedestrian trails. What type of landscaping is being planned, and who is maintaining the landscaping, and how often will that be? So site furnishings and landscaping are currently being considered at trail entry points. However, maintenance is still being worked out and may result in modifications to the current concepts. Who is responsible for trash cleanup, and are garbage cans going to be installed? So city parks maintenance staff will maintain the parkway, and there will be intermittent trash cans along the corridor, which will be emptied by the park staff. Are dogs required to be on leashes while using the trail? Yes, the city has a city-wide leash law as part of their public policy that would apply along the Del Rio Trail also. Will the trail have posted hours similar to a city park? So because trails are funded with active transportation funds and are intended as commuter corridors, it is not permissible to have posted hours for trails. What other items are planned to be installed? Some park benches, trash cans, and stamped concrete will be installed. Enhancements outside these categories will need to be explored as a separate project with the city's Youth, Parks, and Community Enhancement Department, which is basically what used to be parks, and will likely need funding from private donations and/or sponsorships. What provisions will be taken to minimize noise, dust, and air pollution? So mitigation measures are being incorporated into the project specs. The city and the city's contractor are legally required to implement these measures to control dust and air pollution during construction. And in addition, they must abide by the city's noise ordinance. Are construction drawings available to view? The city policy is not to issue draft plans to the public. However, plans have not changed significantly from the concepts presented with the approved environmental document. So let's see, I think it's the next question.
Just to mention it, Lucy, for easier access to those concept plans, we do have it posted on the city's webpage for the project as well as the trail map.
Thank you, Adam. And that's something I do want to let everyone know. If you have not been on the website, it is robust with information. There are tons and tons of FAQs, all the documents like Adam talked about, meeting minutes or meeting recaps from past meetings. Pretty much everything about the project is on the website. So that should help you if you have any questions later on. So what are the impacts to potential historic resources along the trail? The tracks in the embankment have been identified as historic resources in the project corridor as a historic resource. Impacts as described in the final environmental document include removal as rail as needed for safety and lowering of the embankment at the Del Rio Normandy 27th Avenue crossing to provide an ADA compliant east-west path of travel for bicyclists, pedestrians, and school children. What provisions are to be made to minimize the removal of mature trees? And I know Pamela addressed that a little bit, but just a little more for you. So while it's not possible to avoid all tree removal, the design team is doing everything they possibly can to narrow the footprint of the trail. This includes using the steepest slopes allowable and adding minor walls where appropriate to protect mature trees. Is there any outreach plan for the unhoused currently living along the trail? If there are any plans for outreach, when do the plans go into effect? In order to safely construct the project, unhoused individuals may not be in the corridor. Prior to construction, the city will work with unhoused individuals along the corridor to ensure they are safely relocated prior to construction. How will the widened I-5 bridge support large pedestrian groups? This bridge widening is designed to accommodate worst-case scenarios and is fully reviewed by Caltrans. Since this bridge was originally designed for heavy rail loads, even with the widening, large amounts of pedestrians would not be a significant load. Is the current plan to remove or disturb any of the existing rails on the direct north side of Fruit Ridge Road as a part of the project? As shown in our environmental document, a short stretch of tracks at Fruit Ridge Road must be removed to allow for an accessible crossing for rail users. Can the southern end of the bike trail be extended all the way to the town of Freeport or to Cosumnes River Boulevard? The southern limit of the project is at the Freeport Regional Water Facility, which allows connections with the Sac River Parkway and the Bill Conlon Sports Complex. Future projects in the city's bicycle master plan include extension of the trail beyond the Cosumnes River Boulevard, as well as tie-ins to other city trail networks. Okay, so we're going to jump over to, those were the questions that we had received many times prior to the meeting. So I'm going to jump over now and start reading questions that we received from you during the meeting. So if the tracks are being preserved, what purpose will they serve going forward? Will there be plans for some sort of rail project, or is it just a heritage track?
So to my knowledge, there are not currently plans for any sort of rail project. California State Parks, working with the Railroad Museum, are always looking for a potential project to take a recreational train down to essentially to Land Park, down to Sutterville Road on the backside of the zoo. There would not be any project further than that, since that's where the continuity in the tracks would be broken.
Okay, thank you. What entity will patrol to prevent this project from becoming a homeless highway, as many neighbors anticipate?
And I think we covered that in the presentation already, but this trail will be patrolled by the city park rangers, and Sacramento PD would also be assisting them with that.
Okay. Why is there no actuated flashing beacon at 43rd?
So anytime we put in a protected pedestrian crossing, we follow a set of guidelines that the city has developed to ensure safer pedestrian crossings. At that particular, or at 43rd Street, we are going to put in what we generally call bulb outs or curb extensions, essentially shortening the length of the crosswalk. However, the amount of traffic on the street didn't warrant putting anything beyond that.
Okay, thank you. Will there be intersection improvements at Florin and Pockets?
We are looking at ways to better tie the trail into the intersections at Florin and Pocket. Essentially, we will make use out of the existing signals there and allow for trail crossings during the crosswalk movement along those streets.
Okay, thank you. South of the proposed crossing of Riverside Avenue, the existing levee is not wide enough to accommodate both bike path and the railroad tracks. Can we have some detail about the widening of the raised track bed necessary to provide room for the bike path?
So in that area, and really throughout the trail, I don't know if we went into that detail in our presentation, but we have what's referred to as a class 1 path, which ideally, and as we are doing in this project, is a 12-foot wide path with a minimum of 2-foot wide shoulders on either side. So that, if you can picture that, that's essentially a 16-foot wide path that we're going to be building. So on, or at the edge of the tracks, we would be widening a, let's just call it a shelf out at about track height of approximately 16 feet. And then we would have a new embankment running down that would parallel what's existing out there already. So if you pictured the kind of hill leading up to the tracks, that hill at ground level or at the lower ground level would basically be moving over 16 to 20 feet.
Okay, thank you. And then what landscaping, if any, is proposed to be along the bike path? We prefer a minimum of new landscaping.
So just to make it abundantly clear, our goal in this project is really to build the path. We want it to be a aesthetically pleasing path. We want it to be nice for everybody. We don't want to interrupt the nature of the corridor as it is, since that's what makes this corridor so nice to have as a path. So that said, we will basically be planting native grasses anywhere where we widen our embankment, both as an erosion control measure and to match what's existing in the corridor already. We will also be planting as many trees as we can in the corridor. And Sacramento Tree Foundation has stated that they would like to assist us with that. Any other landscaping projects? We are exploring options at entryways, but I think Pamela mentioned earlier that that is dependent on us locating maintenance funds for them. Otherwise, anything else would probably be done under a future parks project and wouldn't be part of the Del Rio Trail at this point.
Thank you. So what is a stream bed alteration agreement?
So a stream bed alteration agreement, if I wanted to try, I'd probably get the number wrong for it. I'm going to look over and say 1602. 1602. Hey, I got it right. Stream bed alteration agreement is an agreement that we make with Department of Fish and Wildlife or the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Basically, we tell them if we are crossing a waterway, what impacts we're going to be having on native vegetation through there and how sensitive that waterway is. They check over our application for it, and if they're in concurrence, then they issue a permit to us, which stipulates any protective measures that we have to take to ensure that we don't unduly disturb wildlife during construction.
Thank you. Can you please tell us more detail about the Zyberg Park connection?
So our trail will primarily be paralleling Zyberg Park. We'll be running along the east side of the park. There will be a connection to one of the existing walkways in the park. but it's really minimal disturbance that we're doing through there.
So will there be sensors to detect bicyclists in advance of signals so the bicyclists do not have to push the pedestrian button?
So at this time, that is not planned for this project. Depending on the location and the level of the signal, there are possibilities that our traffic operations staff could incorporate that type of detection, but they're going to have to look at that and determine the need for that before they can make that guarantee.
Okay, thank you. Are there future plans for the city-owned lot at Palomar Circle?
There are no known plans, or I don't know of any plans at this point. I'm looking at my design team here to see if I'm missing anything. There is a potential future parks project looking at a community garden in that area.
Thank you. Will the stamped color concrete crossing feel like riding on a rumble strip?
No, we would not put stamped concrete in to that degree in the traveled way. Stamped concrete is generally used more as an aesthetic treatment in areas where bikes or people are not walking.
Okay, thank you. Are you marking the trail to conform with the signage on the American River Trail, specifically directing peds to walk on the left?
So that signage is specifically a county policy. The city has not adopted that policy. It's not to say there's no possibility that we would in the future, but there's currently no plan to post that or enforce that.
Okay, thank you, Adam. So will the Sac River Bike Trail be closed during this time, during construction, I would assume?
The Sacramento River Bike Trail is a completely separate trail project from this. I can't really go into details about that too much because I'm not actually in the know on that one. I can say, to my knowledge, the only closures over the existing paved area of the Sacramento River Parkway are due to the Army Corps' construction, and that would have no bearing on this project.
Okay, thank you. Will the trailhead parking be fee-based?
No, there is no intention at this time to put any type of paid parking in that location. That said, our parking department, or I should say our parking division, does have full latitude over all city parking. So if they determined a need at some point in the future, they could do that.
Will there be drinking fountains along the trail for dogs and humans?
There are not drinking fountains planned at this time.
If graffiti occurs on a homeowner's fence, will the city take care of it?
I would have to look into regulations around that. I'm afraid I can't answer that one, but we'll try to find a better answer when we post these questions later.
Okay. Yes. Again, just a reminder, FAQs will be posted to the website after the meeting. Does the 16-foot widening of the berm south of the Riverside Crossing go to Sutterville?
So that 16-foot widening would go to an area just north of Sutterville. At Sutterville, there is a jog in the trail to ensure that we could cross Sutterville Road at a 90-degree angle. So we actually cross over the tracks in that area. Also, the berm that's being referred to is being lowered to grade to allow for an accessible crossing.
Okay. For the I-5 bridge modification, will there be fencing over the top of the bridge?
Yes, there would be fencing on both sides to ensure safe crossing over the freeway and to ensure that there's no intrusion onto the rail or potential for objects to come off the rail.
Okay. Is the trail a uniform width? And if so, what is the width?
Yes, it is a uniform width. And again, it is a uniform 12-foot paved trail all the way through all 5 miles. The only place where this may somewhat change is at street crossings, where we may narrow it slightly just to ensure that we're not creating driveways inadvertently.
For ADA purposes, will the track be removed at 35th and 43rd?
I'm afraid I don't recall that off the top of my head. I would again refer people to the map on the city's website. All of the track removal areas, I believe, are marked in green on that map, so you could check every crossing.
Okay. What about dog pickup stations? Will they be installed along the trail?
I hope so. Again, that is something that's managed through our Parks Department. It's something that I would encourage, but I cannot promise.
What will be the interaction with and access to William Land Park?
So we are improving the sidewalk connection on the side of the zoo, but our trail really is limited to that corridor. So we're not improving access beyond that.
Okay. Will the Del Rio Trail connect with the bike path at LeVar Burton Park at Richfield and 19th?
You're testing my knowledge a little bit. I believe LeVar Burton Park is in the south side of the Meadowview neighborhood. The trail network that attaches to that is actually planned to connect to the same endpoint as the Del Rio Trail, but that would be through a separate city project that's in the works right now, which is the South Sacramento Parkway.
Okay. The access from Zyberg Park to the east side of the existing rail line is fairly steep. Is there going to be a gradual separate access point to the proposed trail?
Let me check with my team real quick. All right, and they were kind enough to remind me. So before we get to Zyberg Park, we're actually transitioning the trail from the top of the railroad berm to the bottom of the railroad berm. And we're actually doing that for a few reasons. One is exactly what's being referred to here, is that we would have too steep an access to get into Zyberg Park. In addition, we're doing that so we can meander the trail a little bit and try to preserve as many of the trees in that area as possible.
Okay, thank you. And speaking of trees, are the trees tagged with metal round numbered tags along the corridor going to be removed?
No. That's not to say none of them will be removed. Unfortunately, our trail project will have an impact on some trees, but the tagging of trees is done so we can take an inventory of everything in this corridor, so we can know what every tree is and be able to describe it on plans. So most of those tags are really there just as an identifier. They're not there as or to signify that a tree is being removed.
Okay. Will there be removable poles or barriers that can be used to keep larger vehicles from accessing the trail?
So at all of our trail entrances, we are installing basically small islands to make access difficult for motorized vehicles onto the trail. City policy is not to install removable poles, which we generally call bollards, unless there is a demonstrated need for them. The reason for that being that bollards are actually a hazard for cyclists. So if at all possible, we try to avoid using them. We are, as I said, putting those small islands in to discourage vehicular access. If there proves to be a greater need, then we would revisit that later if bollards were needed. The one exception I will say to this is most likely at the railroad bridge, we will have to put some type of bollard in and that is going to be a requirement from Caltrans.
Will there be any new easements and public access between road crossings through residential areas?
We are not acquiring any new easements. However, once again, I'll refer to that trail map. There are multiple connections shown to different cul-de-sacs and so on along the corridor, so people can get easier access to this trail.
So RT always mowed the dry grass for wildfire prevention. Since the city owns the land, will the city begin to mow or remove the high dry weed?
Oddly enough, I was just talking to our maintenance staff earlier today to arrange for somebody to get out there and mow the grass. And the answer is yes. Oddly enough, our own code enforcement staff lets us know that we're in violation if we let the grass grow too high and that we need to get out there and mow. So if there's ever a hazard perceived, you can call it into 311, who will contact code enforcement and let us know that we need to mow our lawns.
Thank you. Is there any money in the proposal for hiring more park rangers and maintenance worker for the added trail?
So that is not part of the CIP. The Parks Department has their own budgeting process that they look at for assessing the need for more rangers and determining funding.
Okay. The next one is, will the southern direction of the trail on Freeport Boulevard at Meadowview Pocket Road be narrowed due to the proposed 256 apartment complex at the southwest corner of this intersection, behind the current McDonald's and Shell gas station?
Can you read that again, Lucy?
You bet. Will the southern direction of the trail on Freeport Boulevard at Meadowview Road, Pocket Road be narrowed due to the proposed 256 apartment complex at the southwest corner of the intersection, behind McDonald's and Shell gas station?
I'm honestly not aware of what development is going in there. I can tell you that the city received that corridor in whole from RT, and we are not planning to relinquish any of that at this time. So the trail will be full width through that area.
Thank you. Will the trail connect with Argonaut Park?
Checking with the team. And I'm getting head shakes. No, it will not be connecting to that park.
Thank you. For safety or emergency reasons for the police department, will the trail have post mile marks or some kind of indication for PD to locate persons?
We are working on all of those details right now. The current intentions are, yes, to have post mile marks as well as wayfinding signage and clear delineation of street crossings all along the trail.
Okay. Will there be interactive informational signage along the trail to describe local wildlife, trees, etc.?
That is not something that's planned at this time. That is probably the exact type of project that Parks would look for additional sponsors to fund.
Okay. This bike trail will be used for maintenance access. Some of this maintenance activity using heavy equipment, is the bike track designed to accommodate this load too?
Yes, it is. All of our trails are maintained by vehicles of one type or another, so we always have to design it with maintenance in mind as well.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another drinking fountain question, but a little bit different angle. How can we advocate for drinking fountains along the trail? I think it's fountains along the trail.
So drinking fountains are an amenity provided by our Parks Department, and this is getting a little bit too much of a nuance, I would guess. But the trail is being built by the Public Works Department, who is, in general, is responsible for any pavement that you see in the city. We generally don't maintain landscaping, we don't maintain trash cans, and we don't maintain water fountains. I'm making that distinction to say that were any type of water fountain or anything like that to go in, it would have to be done as part of a parks project. And I believe there are challenges for parks in putting water fountains in that once those are provided, I believe that triggers additional amenities that make it difficult to put in.
Would it be possible to later build bike ped bridges over the busiest roads the path would cross instead of having to deal with cars?
That would be an ideal at any time. However, I would venture to say that the cost of building bridges over those roads would probably be prohibitively expensive.
Okay. Between 35th and 43rd, there's a straight and wide section. Currently, there were several incidents being used for motor or go-kart racing. Is there a plan for any type of street calming feature or speed bump?
So adjacent streets would not be considered part of this project. Something like that, I would refer the questioner to the city's traffic investigators, and they come and analyze that type of situation and determine if there's a need to put some type of traffic calming feature like that in.
Will any type of visual barrier be installed from the elevated trail that looks down into the backyards of the homes along Darnell Way near Riverside?
We do not have any type of additional barrier planned at this time. What we are trying to do, to the extent possible, as we said before, is preserve as many of those mature trees to provide screening as we can.
Okay. What about restrooms? Will there be restrooms along the trail?
Restrooms are, again, one of those things that would fall under a parks amenity, not a trail amenity from this or from the workings of the city. So that would be, or were a restroom to go in, that would be done as a future parks project.
And that is actually the last of our questions for the night. So I want to remind everyone about the web address, which you can see on the final slide here. Adam's contact information is there as well. And if you need anything further on the project, please go to the website. It's just robust with information. It has contact information on there, lots of FAQs. And then check back in a few days and we'll post additional FAQs on the website. We appreciate all of you coming and all of your interest in the trail, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to Lucy for hosting. And as Lucy said, my contact info is on here. We're happy to answer questions at any time, and we will probably be emailing the Q&A for this conversation out as well to all of the email addresses that registered for this presentation.
Perfect. All right. Good night, everybody. Have a good night.